Our Ask the Black Doctor program is where we allow members of the community to ask questions of physicians, people that look like them and share similar life experiences. And we know that you have some questions. This has been a very difficult time, and there are lots of information and lots of rumors and lots of falsehoods. But we're here to answer questions for you. We're not trying to tell you to go and get the vaccine. We're not trying to tell you what you should do, but we're here to provide you with education. Before we get started, we want to have a few housekeeping tips. This session is being recorded. It will be available in a few days on our YouTube page. If you have questions, we're going to ask you to please answer the questions in the chat. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible, but of course, we won't be able to get to all of them. We have several sponsors that we want to thank, but we're not going to, there's so many, we're not going to name them, but we want to thank all of our sponsors. We have several churches and church memberships and organizations that have also sponsored this. I'm going to specifically mention some of them in just a minute. My name is Frank Jones. I am chairman of the board and immediate past president of the Atlanta Medical Association. And I want to bring you greetings from our new president, Dr. Kevin Woods. And we are a local affiliate of the Georgia State Medical Association and also the National Medical Association. I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves, but I am going to mention them by name. Now, Dr. Joseph Darrell Amos, who is a minister and physician, very opinionated young man. That's how I wanted him to be on this show. In fact, everyone here is very opinionated, and that's a positive thing. We have Dr. Dr. Collier, also known as the Hip Hop Doc. And he's very involved with speaking engagements, and also very happy to have him. And Dr. Chris Purnell, I joke and say she's as seen on TV because she's all over television. She's a public health physician and has done numerous talks and interviews. And then we have our pastors that I want to recognize very briefly. Dr. Bishop Joseph Guthrie, pastor of the First Apostolic Church for over 40 years. Reverend Brenda Perche, she's assistant pastor at Ben Hill United Methodist Church. Reverend Harold Bennett of the Temple of Faith Church of God in Christ. Bishop Gregory Fan from the South Fulton Ministerial Alliance. Reverend Shannon Jones, president of Concerned Black Clergy here in Atlanta. Dr. Farron Epps, she's involved in so many different things. I can't even list all of the things that she's involved in. And Reverend Terry Hightower from Antioch Baptist Church North. He's executive director of the Urban Ministries here. We're going to start out by I'm going to pose a question to our panelists and let them answer. These are some of the burning questions. And then we're going to open it up to our pastors who have questions from their congregation, and we're going to let them ask those questions of our panelists. First question goes to Dr. Amos. How do you manage being a minister and a physician? Can those two coexist? And do you ever have a conflict? Tie that in with, would God want me to get this vaccine? Or whoever your spiritual being is. Hopefully we have people here from several different denominations. What are your thoughts about that? Is there anything biblical that talks to us about medicine?
Okay, so briefly, my background, you told me is I went to Morehouse College, Morehouse School of Medicine. I trained at the University of Mississippi. I'm board certified.
A little louder, please, Dr. Amos.
Okay, I'm board certified in general surgery. I'm board certified in critical care. I run a level 1 trauma center in Dallas. My original foray into the ministry started with the Church of God in Christ. I heard you mention Temple of Faith. Used to be Elder Thomas Frazier, so I know him very well, and so I'm familiar with that church. I will start off by just saying quickly, my first experiences as a physician and trying to reconcile what people were saying about faith and what I was seeing is kind of what triggered my exploration into this process. I saw people saying that they had faith that God would heal them. They had faith that, somebody had laid hands on them or anointed them with oil and told them that they would be healed, and then they died. And a lot of times when I would come back and ask the questions or try to understand what happened, there was no accountability. So to answer your question, Dr. Jones, first of all, we know from the gospel that Luke was the writer of the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, and he was a physician who accompanied Paul. So it is clear that there were physicians who were Christians in the sacred text. So I don't see a a contradiction there. I think what has happened and what we must do is we must operate and understand the jurisdiction of each principle. So, for instance, science is based on the rational understanding of the material world. And we use physical principles that guide our understanding, such as gravity, such as, inertia, the law of thermodynamics. Oftentimes, I have patients coming in. Let's say I have a gunshot wound to the spine, who comes in as a paraplegic, and the church folks come in and they say, "Hey, look, God's going to heal him. We've got faith." And I tell people all the time, I said, "Look, I'm a believer," and I said, "I believe that God can do anything." I said, "But at the same time, if I jump off a building, it is God's law of gravity that is going to cause me to accelerate towards the ground at so many meters per second squared." I said, "God made the bones that when you break them, they heal. He also made the spinal cord that when you break it, it doesn't." I don't know why God made the body that way, but for the most part, throughout my career, I have not seen God defy his laws. In conclusion, the last thing I'll say about it is the Bible describes man as a multifaceted being. Man has a physical body, man has a spirit and a soul. The Bible says God breathed into Adam and Adam became a living soul. So faith, as you were asking the question, does not abrogate the laws that God also uses to hold the world, the universe together. Faith is the belief in what God has taught us. And so in the Christian text, which I ascribe to, faith is believing in the word of God. So we cannot take our beliefs or our desires and then impose them upon the eternal, the omniscient, the all powerful God and expect to manipulate the laws. We know that the stories say that Jesus walked on water and Jesus did these things, but it was for the glory of God. And so I think there's no contradiction. I operate in the operating room as a physician. I operate in the pulpit as a minister. I believe one cuts the body, one cuts the soul. I think they're unified, and I think there's an important education that needs to go on in our community so we will not have this superstition and we will not make decisions based on our hope, but based on fact.
Yeah. Dr. Purnell, I'd like to hear from you on that as well.
Sure. So just to let people know who and what I am a public health and preventive medicine physician, board certified. I'm a fellow of the American College of Preventive Medicine. Public health is not only my profession, but it is the manifestation of my calling. It is the manifestation of my purpose. I come from a very strong lineage and tradition of faith and believers. My grandfather, the late Bishop Apostle John W. Purnell, planted over 300 churches in the South, coming out of the Christ and our Lord Jesus Christ, Church of our Lord Jesus Christ movement. And I belong to Beth Hashem Yahweh, where I'm ordained as an apostle. And my brother is Bishop Purnell. So I have always had dual existences, right? I've been ordained since very young, and neither of them negate one another. I love what my brother just said. There are different jurisdictions. Never at any time are those jurisdictions in conflict. And I can give you an example. When I am present as a physician, I am fully present and fully rooted in the science of medicine. I am fully present and fully rooted in the rational decision-making of medicine, but I am also fully present and fully rooted in the scripture. And my patient doesn't even have to believe with the same similitude. I'm just asking the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, to imbue in me and to equip in me to the utmost of my ability. And what I can't do, then I leave to the domain and realm of the Heavenly Father. So at no point should we use faith as a barrier to science. I was raised in a household that was not only steeped in the tradition of faith, but steeped in science. My father was a research science, his father being the bishop. And so at no point do we ever use those things in conflict with one another, meaning myself as a believer and a physician. But I have seen believers who because of, I'll call it stigma, another word for superstition, shame people over diagnoses or mental health diagnoses or physical health diagnoses, or whether or not that they should take medicine. I've had people in my family ask me repeatedly, is there a chip in the vaccine? Can I take this vaccine? Because the Christian right has propagated that this is either a mark of the beast or that there is something in it to track folks and you should not take it. So I think we as Christians and we as physicians and we as scientists have to be very loud and very clear on the matter. And we have to be very loud and very clear that both can coincide and exist together.
Thank you. Dr. Collier.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. M.J. Collier, a graduate of Morehouse College, the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta, and the Morehouse School of Medicine, where I did my residency training. I'm a fellow of the American Academy of Family Physician, and I currently have a private practice doing primary care in the suburbs of the city of Atlanta. So we are seeing and living these things on a daily basis. At one point, I was traveling around the country doing a presentation called Spirituality in Medicine, and it was very well received. And one of the reasons that it was is because if you have, and multiple studies have shown that the connection between the two, particularly for a gifted surgeon like Dr. Jones and Dr. Amos, if a physician prays with his patients before a procedure, you have better outcome. Patients that receive prayer and participate in prayer and have shorter stays in ICU, they have less pain post-operatively. They have better outcomes, fewer infections. So you have to look at all of the benefits of having a spiritual connection between the provider and between the patient. And I tell patients that all the time, to have a good outcome, you have to have a good partnership between those two. And if a person does literally half the things I asked of them, they'll do well. If they do everything I asked of them, they'll do great and wonderful. But you know, when a patient is in crisis and a patient is sometimes challenged spiritually, I tell them that is the time that they should adapt and embrace their spirituality. You know, when they have a diagnosis of cancer, when they have a diagnosis that's going to probably come out with a poor outcome, those individuals have a better quality of life, even if they do ultimately pass away from the disease state. So it's very important that we give a patient a spiritual acknowledgement, and that they know that if you are a practicing Christian, in my case, but whatever your spirituality is, I think it's embraced by anybody. It can be, you know, everybody prays to God when they think they're meeting going to the pearly gates. So it's very important that if a patient that's in your care feels that you have a spirituality about you, they feel more comfortable and have a better experience in those sometimes bad situations. Wow.
Those were three very powerful answers. And let the church say amen. And I think we're ready for the benediction. Amen. We can close on that right now.
We got to take up the collection first.
That's true. The love offering.
So love offerings, please.
But great start. That's what we want to talk about today. We are family here, and we want to answer your questions. We don't want to hide anything. Our last episode was keeping it real, and we're going to still continue to keep it real. Next question, Dr. Purnell. We hear a lot of people say, I am not getting this vaccine. They just want to experiment on me like they did in Tuskegee. And if you're asking what was a Tuskegee experiment, they have no idea. And I'm not disparaging them for not knowing what that was, but we hear that all the time. But I also want you to speak from the context of your father and COVID and what you have experienced with that.
So what I tell people is that back in March, in the spring of 2020, the epicenter of this pandemic was very much New York and New Jersey. I live and work in New Jersey. But that epicenter also personally landed on me. I lost my father, a 78-year-old heroic Black man, on April 13, 2020. He died in a hospital 4 miles from the hospital where I worked. And not only every day, you know, would I see our hospital filled to the brim with Black and brown patients, because we serve a Black and brown majority city, and because of the devastation disproportionate in those communities and groups, but I was grappling with the fact that my father was succumbing to this unprecedented public health crisis, and and this is a perfect answer for the given the question that was just asked. I could do all I can do via the phone with talking to his care team, but the most that I could do was pray. The most that I could do was pray for those under whose care he was, and for a sense of peace. And losing my father in the midst of something that is an unprecedented crisis is surreal. You know, your grieving process is altered. We couldn't take my father back to his father's home church in Richmond, Virginia, and give him the homegoing service that we had always planned because of the restrictions. I watched my father be buried in the ground virtually in Virginia. Here, we had a brief wait with only 4 members of our family could attend, because remember, we're at the height of this pandemic back in April, but I watched my father virtually buried. So I saw so much devastation, and I know intimately the health inequities that keep Black and Brown people from being fully whole and fully actualized in this American society. So I needed a way to be a part of the solution. So I enrolled in the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine trial. As a public health physician, I believe in the science. As a daughter of a man who was a research scientist, I believe in science. And my dad was self-taught. My dad didn't go to college. You know, coming up in the Jim Crow South, going north, fleeing the terror of Jim Crow, settling in the New York area, then New Jersey. My father started at his job cutting grass, because that was the position available to him. And he read textbooks at night. And so I and my father, and the last pertinent fact to his narrative and my narrative is my father had HIV/AIDS. And my father only lived as long as he lived because of the marvels of medicine. It took my father nearly 10 years to tell his family his diagnosis. And it was coinciding with the time that I was in medical school. So I was starting to figure things out myself. But when he got very sick at one point, and he found that moment, he was able to speak his truth. And so I knew, as my father used to plot out his T cells and take him into his appointments with his infectious disease doc, how medicine was being perfected through the clinical research process and prolonged his life. We all know that HIV is very much a chronic disease and infection right now. And the side effects from the medicines got better as time went on. And so I think it's very important to say that I understand the damage of racism. I understand it. I grew up in a house steeped in Black power, Black excellence. And I grew up with a father who stood on brownstones with Malcolm X, who marched with Martin Luther King Jr. So I understood the need to fight for the humanity of our people to be respected. So I had a vigilance around science. And too often science has been a tool of white supremacy. So I understand why there is broken trust in Black and Brown communities. But that does not negate the fact of the science itself. And as a public health physician, I thought a way to demonstrate my accountability to live forward the legacy of my father was to participate in the trial, and was to be a mouthpiece in essence for my community, and to say what the science says, and with no additives. And that is what I think moves the needle. So historically, because of injustices, there's broken trust. And because of ongoing present day disparities, there's broken trust. But it's both the responsibility of the healthcare system, the academic medical complex, to demonstrate trustworthiness, and for people to operate in their self-efficacy, the ability to make an informed choice or decision. So I wasn't a guinea pig. I wasn't a lab rat. Neither was my father in all the years that he did those experimental medicines to keep him alive, but we were yearning for an answer. And science is the process of discovery. And I think the more that our community, we can talk about where science has worked to further our lives and how we played a role oftentimes in that, we can say that both things are true. True racism exists. True, there has been medical experimentation and exploitation, but true, this process right now was done very ethically, the clinical research trials. And true, this vaccine that is a result, or these vaccines that are a result of that process, have not been tainted by those very true statements that I just repeated.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Collier, a lot of questions on people saying, I'm not taking this vaccine because it was developed too fast. And they also want to know, which vaccine should I get? Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, the vaccine technology is amazing. That is the one benefit that we have had from this pandemic, that it accelerated the science of vaccine development. The technology that was used previously was developed in the 1930s. And we were continuing to manufacture with some slight tweaks and upgrades, but basically the vaccine process was unchanged during that period of time. It would take 3 to 5 years to develop a vaccine. We're still growing growing vaccines and eggs, and telling patients if you're allergic to poultry, you can't take this particular vaccine. Some of the preservatives that were being utilized were toxic. So I clearly understand vaccine reluctance because of the history of some of the vaccines. But understanding this, the greatest benefit to public health in the history of the world, not just the United States, but in the history of the world, has been the development of vaccines against infectious diseases. That single entity against diseases such as smallpox, everything from now we have hepatitis vaccines, etc. Those things have changed health as we know it, prolonged life. Instead of people dying in their 20s and 30s, getting married at 12 and 13, they have long lives and they live long and healthy lives. So vaccine technology is amazing. The mRNA vaccines, that's messenger RNA technology, is going to change healthcare as we know it. Because during my medical career, we would always say, well, you can't treat viruses. We don't have any treatments for viruses. You just live through it, go through the symptomatology, and support those symptoms, and go home, bed rest, hydrate, and eat soup. That was the bottom line for the last 40 or 50 years. So we now actually have weapons in our armamentarium that will change not only, and they're being targeted right now at the coronavirus, but there are other viral illnesses in which this same technology can be utilized, particularly HIV, I think. So I think that that's going to be a major change. A lot of cancers can now be directly targeted with this type of technology, the mRNA technology. So instead of using toxic chemicals that you hope do more damage to the disease than they do to the human body, which is our current standard of care, that we will use vaccines that only are directed to the disease state entity. And so no damage is done, and a person can actually heal from a cancer and not have a recurrence 5 years later because of, that we have isolated the highly toxic cancer cells with our primary therapy, which is what we're doing right now. And so everybody responds to cancer therapy initially. I don't care what you do. The vast majority of people, you decrease the cancer burden by 50, 60, 70%, sometimes 80 or 90. But what you do under those circumstances is you isolate a population of super cancer cells that don't respond to any therapy. And so that is why a person does well for a while and they respond well. But then when it recurs, nothing helps because the cells that they have isolated are not responding to any type of treatment. So now that we have this technology available, I embrace it. I highly recommend it. It is safe. I think that basically telling your body to manufacture antibodies against a disease state is just having that knowledge base, and that ability is a blessing from God. This is a true gift that we need to understand. All of the vaccines work. The Moderna vaccine has more of the mRNA, so it's thought to be more potent, if you will, but both it and the Pfizer vaccine have 95% efficacy. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine has 80+% efficacy, but it's more potent against more severe disease states for some reason. I think it targets different areas on the protein spikes on the coronavirus molecule. So all of them are good. If you have a vaccine that's over 60%, you have hit a home run. So with these vaccines now in the 80s and 90%, we have a technology now that we should embrace and wholeheartedly. So I tell people, in your prologue, you said we're not telling you to get the vaccine. Dr. Collier is telling you to get the vaccine. If it is available, get it. If you have access to it, get it. If you're African-American, that's the #1 risk factor in the United States right now. It used to be African-American, and in the past presidential administration, now it's just African-American. But we are disproportionately affected by disease states such as high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, all of those pre-existing conditions that make you have worse outcomes, a more severe disease state if you are unfortunate enough to be infected. So everybody qualifies. And so I tell patients, if it's at your local pharmacy, go get it. Google local vaccine availability and see. And sometimes it's some of the mass screening event sites that they have, it's difficult to get in, it's long lines, etc. But some of the local pharmacists here, I was at a pharmacy yesterday, and people were just walking in. There was no waiting. They were in and out in 15 minutes, and it was just a very smooth process. So, you know, look for it, find it. If you have the ability to get it, get it. Don't worry about whether you're going to be able to get the second shot. Get the first one. We'll worry about the second shot when it's time 4 weeks down the road. But for right now, if you get the first injection of the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, you'll still get 80+% efficacy and protection, and that's it. So the other pathway to immunology is getting the disease and recovering from it. That is also going to help speed the process along. Now, I've been talking about how natural immunity from having had the disease and recovering from it is a pathway to herd immunity that's going faster than the vaccine distribution. Because that's the other one benefit of having so many people infected so rapidly, is that the vast majority of people get over it. They have natural antibodies, and these natural antibodies have been shown by an article that came out yesterday to have great effectiveness even against the variants that are out there right now. Particularly T-cell immunity. So we're going to see some great benefits from utilizing, you know, the vaccines that are available, but also from people that have gotten the disease and have recovered from it.
Thank you very much. We're now going to turn it over to our community, to our pastors, so they can ask questions that their members have asked them. And also remember, we want to talk a little bit about should we reopen the doors of the church? Is it time for that, or do we need to still be patient? So if you have any questions about that, please ask those as well. We're going to start with Bishop Guthrie. Bishop Guthrie, do you have any questions from your congregation? We'll take one question from, and then we're going to go around with some of the pastors. We'll come back to you, but one question for the panel.
Yes, thank you for allowing us to be with you all. The question that I have is,
and please remind us where you're from again, Dr. Guthrie.
I'm Bishop J.D. Guthrie, and I pastor the First Apostolic Church here in East Point, Georgia, a little suburb on this out from the city of Atlanta. My question is, when will it be safe to re-enter the church, especially during the time of this pandemic? Is it safe when 85 or 90% of the people have has been vaccinated, or when is a good time for us to think about re-entering?
Okay, and Dr. Purnell, I'm going to ask you to answer that one, but we're going to ask all of our panelists to please, in this round, to please be very, very, very brief so we can get to as many questions as possible. Dr. Purnell.
Good to hear from you tonight, Bishop. I'm going to speak first from the experience of my own ministry. So we had been primarily virtual until probably the late summer, early fall, when we started to have one in-person service per week. We were able to have that one in-person service a week because community spread had fallen very low in New Jersey. And at that point, we enacted multiple barrier methods. So plexiglass throughout the church, plexiglass around the speaker, the bishop, plexiglass around where the praise and worship team is. Everyone has to be masked at all times. The only time anyone mask comes off is the bishop's mask when he's behind the plexiglass and there is no one within 6 feet of him. We practice strict physical distancing. Only families are allowed to sit together and they're really in an assigned location. We do screening before anyone enters the church using the screening tools that the CDC makes available to the public. We do a screening questionnaire as well as temperature screening and vigorous hand hygiene. So I wanted to give that example, and we understand the ventilation of the system, right? So we're looking at flow dynamics, because coronavirus spreads through aerosolization as well as respiratory droplets. So I say that to say it is possible to be in an indoor environment if you can control for certain factors. If you are in an environment where community spread is moderate to severe, I would I would speak with caution. And so I wouldn't say a blanket, hey, everybody can go back to church. But it is possible to be indoors if you're following very strict guidelines. And we also we know the capacity of the sanctuary. And right now we don't have a full capacity service because we have to be able to separate households that live together from other persons by 6 feet. And so that's what I would say about returning to church.
Thank you.
And we've had several webinars where we've discussed that in and of itself. I mean, that's a whole webinar in and of itself that we could discuss. Next, we're going to go to Reverend Brenda Prochet. She's the assistant pastor at Ben Hill United Methodist Church.
Okay, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Glad to be with you tonight. So our question is, with the current vaccines, will they need to be updated annually, every 5 to 10 years, or once in a lifetime? Our congregation is really interested in how long will the vaccine be effective?
Right.
Dr. Amos.
Yeah, I'll answer that. One thing I was going to say in regards to the new technology, the reason that this was not just brought up in a few months, they had been experimenting with mRNA vaccine technology for years. The problem is that at the temperature that we normally give vaccines, mRNA is unstable. And so they have developed a way. That's why one of the challenges with Pfizer and the Moderna was keeping the vaccine at a certain temperature and then administering it. And we know that once you administer it, within a short period of time, the mRNA molecule disintegrates. And I'll say this, I like the technology of the mRNA because it is not directed like our traditional vaccines based on a virus strand that has been made harmless, but rather it targets the outer portion of the coronavirus, where if you look at it, imagine you have a spear with little cones coming out. Those are the spike proteins. So what it really attacked was the ability of the virus to get intracellular. A virus has to go inside the cell in order to make more virus. The virus in itself cannot manufacture more virus. So they're preventing the spike protein from entering into the cell by us making antibodies against the spike protein. So I think it's fascinating technology, and I agree with Dr. Collier. I think it's going to revolutionize our treatment of vaccines. But that being said, to the Reverend's question, nobody knows. That's one of, we've had a short cohort of people that we have experimented with and shown the efficacy. And when we say efficacy, doctors, we like to use big words, the effectiveness of the virus. How effective is it from preventing the disease? And so we have not been able to see people out for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It was a very quick trial and there was a short period. They estimate anywhere from 6 to 9 months. I can tell you personally, I took my first dose. It was Pfizer because I'm, frontline worker. And then my youngest, my 14-year-old, brought it home and everybody got infected. I got coronavirus right after my first vaccine. I had symptoms of I lost smell and I was fatigued. That was it. And about 4 days later, I was over it. After I finished my quarantine, I went in and I got the second dose. And I have not had another problem since then. But the question that we all asked, so my question to myself was, how long will my native antibodies from getting the vaccine, as Dr. Collier, herd immunity, how long will my own antibodies last? And then how long will the antibodies that I've made from getting this mRNA vaccine? And, we know that people that had the infection, when they were measuring the antibodies, like in my kids, they say anywhere from 90 to 120 days is the length of period at which the antibodies are detectable within the bloodstream. But then there's the whole aspect of helper cells. And, we have other layers of the way that we fight infection. And ultimately what we have to do, and I think somebody's asked this question, I believe in taking vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, all of the things that boost our immune system, because I do believe that the viruses, which have been here as long as us, are not going away. And really, technology shouldn't just be for us chasing a carrot for each new virus like we do for the flu. But I think we also have to spend some time and some thought and some technology in developing ways that augment the immune system. Our immune system is phenomenal. And when we learn how to use our immune system and continue to develop the ways that we boost our immune system, I think we'll increase our ability to fight off these diseases and cancer. So we're waiting. We have to check people that have had the virus at 9 months and a year and 2 years and 5 years and do those trials and those studies before we can answer that question.
All right, thank you. Next, we're going to go to Dr. Harold Bennett. Dr. Bennett, are you there?
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me on this conversation. My question is one that stems from some of the recent developments that we've had with respect to this COVID-19. In particular, the question that I had been presented with was this new COVID-19 variant. We're seeing these mutations, and the question is, what do we know about this new strand, and whether or not the vaccines that we have, can they be applied? Or will they, using the term that my colleague had mentioned earlier, the efficaciousness of the new vaccine? So it's the new strands, the mutations. What do we know about them? And will these new, will the vaccines that we have, will they in any kind of way be effective with treating them?
Dr. Bennett, you always trying to use big words.
No, that guy did.
You know, you from North Carolina. You use it. That was about 10 syllables. Efficaciousness. He's from Vanderbilt. He's a good friend of mine, so I can talk about it. But before we have Dr. Collier answer that, can you just tell us about your church affiliation?
Yes. I'm Harold Bennett. I am from the Church of God in Christ, and I am also the dean of the seminary here in Atlanta. So I'm very much so involved with faith and with medicine. And when I say faith and medicine, the whole idea of faith healing and talking about how the two can work together, which I appreciated the conversation earlier. There's a lot that I think we could say about that. But I'm very, very excited about the fact that God puts in the body the gifts of healing, And I do think this committee that we have tonight, that's very much so spiritual and in touch with medicine, are embodiments of this gift, one of the various gifts of healing.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. Dr. Collier.
Okay, the vaccines, again, studies that were released today noted that the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine both have efficacy against both variants, the predominant variants that we have now. And the UK variant is thought to going to be the predominant variant in the United States by March. So
tell people what a variant is, Dr. Collier. People
that's where the virus mutates somewhat from its original genetic capability. And I think the UK version has 4 mutations, and the one from South Africa has 8 or 12, something like that. But there are changes that can sometimes make the antibodies no longer recognize them, and that is how the mutation of viruses can change the way the antibodies respond to them. But in this situation, again, the question was, would the antibodies themselves provide protection? And say the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is not in the United States yet, but is coming, they had 1 million doses ready to distribute in Africa, and they held those doses because it was found not to be that efficacious against that particular variant. And so then upon further review, they're seeing that it does. And so they re-released it, and now it's going to be distributed because some vaccine is better than no vaccine. So, but of those that are available right now, the Moderna and the Pfizer both appear to show efficacy against the variants that are out there. And the quicker we can get the vaccine in arms, the quicker we can shut down some of these mutations, because as long as the virus is out there and it has viable hosts, it can mutate. And once we shut down its ability to do that. But see, we have been looking for the $1 million cure in the new medicine when, as Dr. Amos said, things that are natural, such as vitamin D. vitamin D is, for whatever reason, 9 out of 10 of my patients in my practice are vitamin D deficient, and across the United States, vitamin D deficiency exists. Don't know whether it's something in the food chain, something in the atmosphere, but for whatever reason, particularly in African Americans, you would expect vitamin D levels to be prominent. I'm in the South. We get plenty of sunlight. It should be prominent, but it is not. And for people who have low vitamin D levels, they have higher morbidity. They are in the ICU more often. They're on ventilators more often than people that have better levels or moderate levels of vitamin D. So the first thing that happens when people were admitted to the hospital before we had any treatment, this is before remdesivir, convalescent antibodies, or anything else, they'd at least treat them with vitamin D. So if you could get, the normal range for vitamin D is between 30 and 90. If you can get a vitamin D level up to 40, you are boosting the immune system so that it has an effect on bacterial infections such as Staphylococcus and Streptococcal pneumonia, viral infections such as influenza A and B and the coronavirus, and fungal infections such as toenail fungus, vaginal yeast infections in women, and jock itch in men. So the vitamin D is again a natural substance that has always been there. It's just something that again, if we could get the public to embrace, we could. It's thought by some naturopaths that if we could get everybody in the United States vitamin D up to the level of 40, we could shut the pandemic down in as little as 2 weeks. So I'm a strong believer in that therapy as well. I take my vitamin D, 5,000 international units every day, zinc at 30 milligrams per day, and 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. I think that boosts my immune system tremendously and allows me, to have, if I do get infected, it definitely is not as severe as it would have been. So the vaccines are potent at this time. They're effective against the variants.
All right. Next, we're going to hear from from Bishop Gregory Fan from the South Fulton Ministerial Alliance. Are you on, Bishop Fan? Priscilla, do you see Bishop Fan on? If not, we'll come back and we're going to move on. Reverend Shannon Jones from the Concerned Black Clergy.
I better get ready because that man told me.
All right, we'll keep moving. Dr. Faron Epps. Dr. Epps, are you on?
Hey Frank, while you're searching for people, one thing I'll say in 30 seconds to the whole mutant thing is that these are very primitive organisms and they're trying to survive. And so they keep adapting. And so as I work in critical care in the ICU, we believe in antibiotic stewardship. Doctors in the old days used to give everybody just, antibiotics like candy. And what it did was it promoted adaptation and mutation in the bacteria until we got bacterial resistance. And so the viruses are also trying to survive. And the fact that there are so many people infected, it allows the viruses to adapt. The beauty of the mRNA, though, is that because it's targeting the spike proteins, these variants were still susceptible to this technology. Versus like the flu, when you take a flu vaccine, it's a very targeted strand of the variant of the virus, where you can still get the flu after you get the vaccine because you may not have target. And the same thing is for HPV. We have vaccines against HPV that get certain strands, and then certain strands we're still susceptible to. So I think, as Dr. Collier indicated, as I'm a believer in, I think diet is a huge portion of why our immune systems are so weak.
Okay. All right. I see Dr. Epps is on now. If we could unmute Dr. Epps, and I'm going to ask our panelists. I know this is hard. I'm going to ask you to please try to keep your comments to 45 seconds. I know that's an impossible task, but please, so we can get a lot more questions in. Dr. Epps, tell us a little bit about who you are, and we'll have a question from you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Oh, you just got muted again. You were unmuted and you got muted again. Okay, go ahead.
All right, I'm not going to move. So this has been a great conversation. I'm actually an assistant professor of nursing at Emory University. And, I think this was much needed for us to speak with the faith communities to answer these questions. So many people, as I'm out in the community doing work, how can we address, I don't know if y'all have heard it, and maybe it was mentioned earlier, but, letting people or reassuring them that they're not going to have a third arm growing out their head. Like, what are some things that we can say to tell our family members, and as we're out in the community doing community work, what is it that we can say in one sentence to get people to sign up for the vaccine?
Okay. Dr. Purnell, that's a great question, because that's what people want to know. People are afraid something bad is going to happen to them. So
I just want to start it with this very, very interesting polling data is coming out, especially in the month of January, just prior to President Biden's inauguration. If you look at the communities that are definitely no, or you'll have to require or mandate the vaccine for me to take it, those communities are not represented among Black and brown groups at any higher rates than among white populations in the United States. In Black groups, we comprise a lot of the wait and see category. In this one Kaiser Family Foundation poll in particular, 43% in that category were Black. And what Black folks, or Black adults specifically, were asked, what they were looking for was to be able to understand the long-term effects of the vaccine, which no one knows to date. Blacks were looking to understand, would taking this vaccine prevent me from getting coronavirus illness? Blacks were looking to understand, will the vaccine itself make me sick? And Blacks were looking to understand, if I take the vaccine, can I return to normal life? If we can have conversations with answers for those very basic and simple questions, those folks were more likely to move forward in their decision journey. Okay, so to start with the first one, long-term consequences of the vaccination. My colleagues on the panel tonight have said that science cannot say that definitively because the studies have not had that space of time. But we can look back across all vaccine research across the years. If you are going to have an immune-mediated side effect or adverse reaction to a vaccine, it is most likely to happen within the first 6 weeks to 2 months of administration of the vaccine. That's why the FDA required 2 months of safety data. So the fact that you have had 2 mRNA vaccine candidates and pending a third, be able to present data to the FDA to say there was nothing that was significantly an adverse reaction or outcome would make it extremely rare that something would happen at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that's just not what the bulk of research has shown us through the years, right? So that's one question. 2, we know from both of these vaccines that are approved to date that the side effect profile is actually mainly mild. Most people experience pain in their arms. Most people experience tenderness or swelling in their arm. After that, a lot of people can experience headache. After that, people can experience fatigue, and a fewer amount can experience fever and or chills. Even when people experience those routine and normal side effects, which means your immune system is working, you go back to your baseline usually in 1 to 3 days. So that's what people want to hear. So if you've already been vaccinated, right? They talk about vaccine circles, right? Whether the vaccine circle is in your family or the vaccine circle is in your community. Talk about your experience. I tell people I've been fully vaccinated at this point for 3 months. I was in the trial. I got my first dose August 31st. 31st. I got my second dose October 2nd. I had those side effects that have been described in the literature. I returned to my baseline in a matter of days. Headaches was the longest side effect I had. And the more that we can share those stories, that moves the needle for people. And then that third one, is it effective? Will it prevent me from getting disease? Will it prevent me from getting very sick from coronavirus? This is what Black people want to know. Is this worth it, right? So what's the risk to benefit? It is a game changer. 94.1 and 95% effectiveness is beyond what we could have imagined. The FDA said it had to be 50% effective, right? And we blew through that, we meaning the scientific community. So if we can describe those 4 things for folks, 3 of which we already have answers to, people are more likely to say, okay, I have fears, I have concerns, I have some skepticism, but the benefit is outweighing the fears, the concerns, or the skepticism. And we have to keep repeating that message over and over and over again.
All right. We're going to keep moving. The one thing that I heard, one thing we heard in our previous webinar, someone articulated very well that it's all about relationships and the relationships that you have with your personal physician and with other trusted people that you have. It's all about having that discussion, the things that Dr. Purnell just talked about. Next, we're going to hear from Reverend Hightower, Antioch Baptist Church North. Are you on, Dr. Hightower, Reverend Hightower? If not, we're going to go back to Bishop Guthrie. We're going to get to some of our questions in the chat as well. Bishop Guthrie, you can ask your second question. And again, please try to limit your answers so we can get as many questions as possible. Bishop Guthrie, are you ready for your second question?
My question is, what is the proper procedure for disinfecting our churches?
Okay. Anybody in particular want to answer? I'm not going to throw that on anybody in particular. Anyone want to answer that question?
I'd be happy to address part of it. The things that we have been doing for the majority of the pandemic, and that is cleaning surfaces with alcohol preparations or a variety of different cleaners, including basic things like Lysol spray, etc. There are now additional labeling on there that says treating the coronavirus, although some of them already had that label on there. They're just highlighting it at this point. But the main thing, very few people are catching the virus from a contact surface. People are catching it from aerosolization of the virus and or direct coughing and sneezing droplets. So again, the social distances is key. The masking is key. There is technology where you can literally spray the environment with electrostatic particles that will capture and destroy the virus. And that technology is amazing. But again, it's as good as that treatment. The next day or the next time somebody enters the environment, you're just as susceptible. So having done that process in a variety of different circumstances, I realized basically the futility of it. So the key thing is, again, keeping your mask on, your social distancing, and hand sanitizers, washing your hands, etc. Those are key, will always be key. And basic cleaning, wiping down the surfaces, etc. on a regular basis will also help. But to get these churches back open and allowing parishioners to come in, following those strict guidelines, there are churches that are having services every Sunday now, and they're doing so by, again, following protocols that appear to be appear to be very effective.
And just to add to that, I put in the Q&A chat box and I put in the chat box for panelists and attendees. The CDC goes through for faith-based settings how you might be able to resume services in a safe and controlled environment. And I want to emphasize that we were able to do that in our house of worship because we have been very strict at following those guidelines. Those guidelines of physical distancing, screening at the door. You can't get in. Dr. Chris just won't let you. I love you, pray for you. You can fuss me out another day, but you can't get in if you have any symptoms that are consistent with coronavirus or you've been exposed to coronavirus. You're going to get temperature screened. The barriers, if churches can do it, I can tell you it has worked well for us. Very high risk, vulnerable persons, they are behind plexiglass barriers. The speaker is behind a plexiglass barrier. Our singers never take their mask off. You can do praise and worship with your mask on. And so if you follow those basic public health measures and guidelines, you can safely resume services, but you can't be lax, and you can't, and I wouldn't recommend it if you have very high community spread where you are located. We did it at a time that we had low community spread, and spread in New Jersey has bumped up a bit in the winter, but it's nothing like when we were at the height of the epidemic when our church was only virtual.
And the one thing that's a pet peeve with all of us, the health professionals, when it comes to masks, you have to wear your mask correctly. It drives me crazy to see people with the mask over their mouth. That is not doing anything. So please tell your family members, your friends, your parishioners, your members, please, the mask has to be covering your nose and your mouth. Reverend Preche, we're back to you.
Excellent. I'm so glad that we had this discussion on reopening our church. At Ben Hill, we've been working for the last 8 months, bringing our lay leaders together and trying to decide how it is that we will reopen, looking at the CDC guidelines and those sort of things. But one of the things that, I mean, okay, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you again.
Okay, so having our guidelines, which we have, our congregation as people, I mean, we like to hug each other, we fellowship with one another. So my question is, even with the guidelines and the community coming together to set those guidelines, which is by CDC, we're going by the book and encouraging that, having lots of dialogue and discussion. But when we come together, missing the fellowship and wanting to be with each other, I'd like to ask these doctors, what kind of recommendations would you have to help us as people to change our behavior towards this new normal?
I'm going to take that one and kind of, so we can kind of speed the process along a little bit. But you're exactly right, Dr. Preche. When we get together, I mean, I've been to funerals, I've been to other activities. We just want to hug. And we say, well, I'm just going to hug you. It's okay. And that's the danger in it. We can have all of these protocols, but if we don't follow them 100%, it's risky. And so you have to be absolutely sure if you're going to open your church, you have to do everything right. You have to be right almost 100% of the time. So then you have to weigh, is it worth opening it or not? Can we still celebrate? Can we still have church and be outside the church? And so that's something that the individual church leaderships have to decide, but it's a risky undertaking to open up the church.
We don't hug and greet during services. And that's what I'm talking about. You have to enforce public health guidelines. Only families hug and touch themselves. If you don't live in the same household, there is no hugging, there's no greeting.
Yeah.
Holy
I want to answer one or two questions. Dr. Purnell, do you have to step outside? Are you waving? Do you have to?
No, I was saying that's what we do at church. The holy wave. You can't. Because I'm on the mic saying it. Okay, holy wave at your partner, your neighbor.
Oh, okay. I want to answer some of the questions that are in the chat, and I thought this was a very good one because this actually came up yesterday. I heard it on the news. You may have already answered this, but if I'm exposed to someone with COVID-19 and I've had both immunizations, do I have to quarantine?
No,
who wants to
just
take that?
Came out with the guidelines. Dr. Anthony Fauci and the COVID coronavirus task force says that no, if you've had both vaccines and if you've had exposure, you don't have to quarantine. Now, this is a new change because before you had to quarantine. If you were exposed, you had to quarantine for 14 days. If you actually had it, you only had to quarantine for 10 days. which didn't make any logical sense to me. But you know, why not either keep both of them 14, the lower one to 10? But now they're saying if you and this is, you know, fresh, hot off the presses, the information that Dr. Fauci is saying that you don't have to quarantine if you've had both vaccines, and just because you've been exposed, because literally everybody's been exposed at this point. There's no one who hasn't been exposed. That used to be a good question early in the pandemic, but now if you're going out anywhere under any circumstances, you've been exposed because it's so prevalent in the population.
Okay, we have a good question. Very brief answer, please, Dr. Amos. They said, please ask you to clarify that you contracted the virus from your son before his vaccine had a chance to work. We don't want the public to assume that the vaccine did not work. Can you just make a brief comment on that?
Yes, my dear and long-standing friend, 45 seconds. So this is the deal. When you get the vaccine, it takes a while for the body to make the antibodies. So for the first 7 to 14 days, you don't have enough antibodies to prevent infection. So I took my first vaccine, and then my son, who had been exposed playing basketball, was exposed. I was exposed through him. So before I could mount an antibody response, I got infected. It had nothing to do with the vaccine whatsoever. And in fact, out of our group, there were other physicians that were part of our small quarantine group that also got the infection. We all got over it, and then we got the second vaccine. Had I had 14 days to build up my immunity, I would not have been infected. Had I gotten first and second shots, I should say.
And one point I want to mention and emphasize that I heard Dr. Fauci say and have read, the thing about the vaccines is that out of all the people that have received the vaccines, that have been in the studies, no one has died if they got the vaccine. There are different levels of illness that you may get, but no one has died. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. Another important question from one of our legendary members in the Atlanta Medical Association, Dr. Patrick Griffith. How you doing, Dr. Griffith? It says, question about the recent cases of idiopathic immune thrombocytopenia in patients that have received the vaccine. Does anyone there want to talk about that one? In a brief, again, I'm urging you all to please be brief so we can get to some more questions. Anybody have any answers on that?
I would just say this. When we initially approached the virus, we thought we were dealing with pneumonia and ARDS. As we have learned more about it, it is a vascular disorder. And so what we're finding in these patients, there's higher levels of stroke, DVT, pulmonary emboli. In our trauma world, you know, people come in all the time. We don't know what their status is, but I can tell you I've had 18-year-old, 20-year-old, 30-year-olds having massive PEs, large segment DVTs, and strokes, because it's a vascular phenomenon. So somewhere in that cytokine system and that inflammatory reaction, this virus is stimulating and activating that. So some people are having cytokine storm and they're hypercoagulable, which is why in the unit we follow D-dimers. We measure sometimes some of the people we're putting on anticoagulation, which is also why we recommend aspirin for some of the people that are at home, because we're trying to diminish their platelet response. So I don't have the technical answer, you know, to pinpoint it, but this is a vascular disorder that affects the blood vessels in the lung and throughout the rest of the body.
We have Reverend Hightower from Antioch. Dr. Hubbard, he says he is on. Can you see if you can find him? Reverend Terry Hightower is on the show, but he says that he's tried to communicate with us several times.
Must be in. I need his phone number.
Well, while you're trying to locate him, we're going to go back to to Dr. Bennett. You're up again, Dr. Bennett. Next question.
Wonderful. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
I have a question that I was wondering about, and I've heard people raise, is whether or not there's a particular kind of demographic in the Black community that should not get vaccinated. I mean, because you know our churches are comprised of young folk, children, you know, people with pre-existing conditions. Is it safe for everybody to get vaccinated, or is it some that shouldn't, and why would that be the case?
Dr. Collier, are you aware of anybody that should not get vaccinated?
when the question was asked when the vaccination were first becoming available, they were asking about populations that should not take the vaccine. And they went, of course, with people that had normal health status and then people with pre-existing conditions who were advocating getting the vaccine because of the pre-existing conditions, not necessarily that the vaccine was safe in that population. So in the studies, they did have a few women that became pregnant, but because they were not initially saying that pregnant women should get the vaccine. Then they extrapolated that to patients with immune compromised disease, people with HIV, a long list of people with a variety of different autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, etc. And the overall recommendation, which I wasn't exactly, I don't think is necessarily scientifically sound, but the recommendation was that anybody could get it. And I said, that just, that's not science, that's just hope and prayer. But and with the caveat at the end of that recommendation that no scientific studies have confirmed the safety and efficacy in these patient populations. So the answer to the question is there are people that probably shouldn't get it. And the only thing I can say is that you should consult with your primary care physician or your specialty care physician that's taking care of that disease process, determine how stable your condition is and whether the benefits of getting the vaccine outweigh any potential risks of getting the vaccine. But I was really surprised that recommendation came out from the CDC, as in, everybody can take it. And then the World Health Organization declines that phenomenon. They have a list of people that they say should not get the vaccine, and that includes pregnant women.
Right. Can I weigh in on that? Because that's something that we're talking about a lot in public health. So if you look at who participated in the coronavirus vaccine trials, it was very important for a significant portion of the population to be 65 and older. Those in that population have by nature a certain prevalence of comorbid or chronic health conditions. In addition to that, persons who were younger than 65, roughly about 17% in Moderna's trial had a diagnosed chronic health condition. I have 2 diagnosed chronic health conditions. I have an autoimmune mediated vitamin B12 deficiency, right? So my gut doesn't make the right receptors. I can't absorb vitamin B12. In addition to that, I have postural orthostatic tachycardia. So I take a host of medicines every day of my life to function and maintain my baseline. You had people in the trial who had autoimmune disorders and who had things like stable HIV infection. The reason why the CDC gave the recommendation is because across the 30,000 plus 44,000 and then the unique populations that I've described, there was no evidence that said having this condition puts you at risk for an adverse outcome, because when you looked in the placebo arm and you looked in the vaccine arm, there wasn't a skewing toward those in the vaccine arm to have adverse reactions, okay? But outside of the 74,000, when you start to open up the vaccine administration to millions and millions and millions upon the public, there will be scenarios that weren't tested, right? This is what the doctor is describing. That's why the CDC almost came out immediately, in which was, I was surprised by, but I didn't think it was about science, that it did not bar or did not dissuade vaccination in pregnant women, because there were persons in the trial who got pregnant by, incident and they were vaccinated and didn't have any adverse outcomes. But ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, definitely came out very strong several days after the CDC, saying that because coronavirus infection can be so severe in pregnant women and the outcomes are so adverse potentially, that pregnant women with their physician should do shared decision making, but we should not blanket and say you should not take the vaccine. There are people who are contraindicated. If you have an allergic reaction to the first dose of the vaccine, you should not take the second dose of the vaccine, even if that allergic reaction isn't as severe as anaphylaxis, meaning your tightening or your closure of your throat. If you have an allergic history to any of the components of the vaccine, you should not take the vaccine. Okay, if you're actively on chemotherapy, you should not take the vaccine. There are even other precautions, but not nots. So for instance, a precaution, if you've had an allergic reaction to an injectable or another type of vaccine, you should be cautious about this vaccine, but again, engage in shared decision-making with your patient, with your provider. I can't emphasize that last point a lot, but I don't want people thinking who have stable chronic health conditions that this vaccine is not for me.
All right. Priscilla, are we able to hear from Reverend Hightower yet?
Under a phone number, we need to receive his phone number. We'll be more than happy to release him.
Let me see. I think I have his. I don't know if he wants me to give his phone number out over the airways, but I'll get that to you in just a minute. Let's go back to is Bishop Fan or Reverend Jones here?
No, they have not come on.
Okay, well, let's go back to Bishop Guthrie.
Yes, sir. The question is, why is it that Black and brown Americans who have the highest death rate are finding it difficult to get the vaccine?
That's the $1 million question, Bishop Guthrie. Dr. Collier, you want to tackle that?
Well, I would say it's just the logistics of getting them to those communities. In a lot of communities, there's no access to healthcare. There's no access to pharmacies. There's no access to where the vaccine is. So the official posture that has been taken now by the current administration, as well as the public health department, is to get the vaccine to the people. And so that's why you're seeing more community events where vaccinations are occurring. They're going to have mobile vans. They're going to have teams of people that will go out into these communities and take the vaccine and make it readily available. Sometimes it's just a simple matter of them designating, okay, we have, 50,000 doses for this community, but there's no one there to receive it. There's no one there to adjudicate distribution. There's no one there. And once these vaccines are on, the clock is ticking. They have a shelf life. If you do not utilize it, it just goes to waste. So, those particulars, when they started the early rollouts and they just said, we'll just send it to the states and let them figure it out. Someone realized that there had to be a much more definitive process to do so. And that is unfortunately because of the communities that most Black and brown people live in. A lot of the simple things that are very prevalent north of I-20 in Atlanta are not prevalent south of I-20 in Atlanta. So, and for those patient populations, it's literally being looked at and worked on. I don't think there's any, active, malfeasance going on that's saying, let's keep this virus away from Black. You have two arguments on social media now. They won't give the vaccine to Black people, or they will give it to them because it's got chips in it or some other negative effect that they're looking for. So both are, I think, inappropriate discussions and arguments to have. I think it is readily available, but it's literally just a matter of rethinking the logistics of making it available in some of these different places. And I think the faith-based community and the churches are going to be key for getting these vaccines out into the community.
Definitely. Can I just weigh in on that really quickly as a doc who focuses on health equity? The definition of racism is that racism is a system of structuring opportunity, whereby one group based on phenotype or social construct of race is disadvantaged. Another group based on phenotype or the social construct of race is advantaged, but by which the strength of the entire society is that racism isn't accidental. It's a system. And if you don't think through the barriers that are inherent that racism creates, because racism structures the distribution of resources, then communities who have been historically excluded, disenfranchised, marginalized, and economically vulnerable are going to get less access to the vaccine. 5.4% of vaccinations went into Black arms. 11.5% went into Latino or Latinx arms. That is a despicable inequity. And so if you aren't doing something intentionally to prevent that, you are allowing racism to exist and persist. And what we know is that in the same communities that are saddled with these structural determinants that are not appropriately resourced are where you have convenience barriers, meaning what is the time of the vaccinations, the location of the vaccinations, transportation barriers, who can get to where the vaccinations are being offered, language and literacy barriers. Are the vaccinations being publicized in all languages? Are is it being publicized in language that people understand? That's literacy. And if there is a baseline of skepticism or a baseline of distrust because of institutional powers failing to demonstrate trustworthiness, and if you aren't doing things to dismantle or disrupt that trust, you are allowing the system of racism to proliferate. There must be a full court press by every level of government. There must be a full court press by every sector to ensure that all groups, especially those who were disproportionately impacted and devastated by this pandemic, have access to the vaccine. And that wasn't always true. And the more that we in healthcare, especially those of us who focus and work in health equity, have sounded that alarm, and you have a different administration, you see a responsiveness around that. But we cannot let up. We cannot let up.
We're getting close to having to bring this to a close, but we have try to get in a few more questions. And I see that Bishop Fan has joined. So let's get a question from Bishop Fan.
I'm sorry, I'm coming on late, Doctor. I didn't get the link. I just got the link. But I want the question that I have is, why wasn't the Black doctors and your association contacted early on to help educate the community about this vaccine? That's the question that I have.
Well, I'll take that one because I have the same question. And in Atlanta, the Atlanta Medical Association, we represent, not all members, but we represent about 4,000 Black doctors just in Metro Atlanta. And then we have the Georgia State Medical Association, which probably adds another 1,000. And then we have our National Medical Association, which is another tens of thousands. And that represents hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of patients. We should have a seat at the table when it comes to discussing the distribution of vaccines, everything about COVID. We should have a seat at the table. And we have been actively asking, even as recent as yesterday, asking for that seat at the table. We might have to do like we did in the old days and go take that seat at the table. But right now we're asking for it. So you are right on target, Bishop Fan, that if you were talking about our people that are being most affected, why aren't we at the table? And so that's what we are actively working on right now.
If there's anything that we can do from the South Florida Ministerial Alliance or what have you, we want to help promote that, because you guys are our doctors and we're going to rely upon you guys in terms of telling us if the vaccine is good or not good. So for you guys not to have a seat at the table is definitely an insult to the Black community as a whole, to not have your organization and Black doctors at the table discussing what should happen in terms of distributing this vaccine and getting information out to your patients. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you. And I do want to note that there have been several churches, and if your church is interested, but several churches have come to us and said that they're interested in being a mass vaccination site. And I have passed that on to our contacts at the State Department of Health and Dr. Toomey, and we're trying to work on that right now. So if your church is interested in being a site, I know I've already spoken with Reverend Hightower and Reverend Prechet, and I'm sure some other churches would like to as well. So please just let me know offline and we can have you in the queue when that happens.
Dr. Jones, Stevie Wonder said, when you believe in things that you don't understand, superstition ain't the way. I think, one of the things that we have to remember is the former administration did a horrible job in preparing for vaccine rollout. Biden's been in for, just over a month. And I think, we all know the federal government moves slow. And when you look at the social determinants of health, you already know that Black and brown communities are already ostracized and outliers. And I think when you put those, you already had a natural mix that was going to make it hard and difficult. And so the fact that the Trump administration stonewalled Biden's administration until the very last minute, those guys are scrambling. I'm not making excuses for them, but I do think, when you look at how the federal government operates and how they work, it's going to take a Herculean effort. And I think, to your point, we have to demand to have a seat at the highest levels of the table so that we can speak and be advocates for our community. 45 seconds till I said it.
I have a question that everybody's asking. It's about a family member. Basically, how do you get the vaccine? And I've gotten so many phone calls. I'm sure each of you have gotten phone calls. And right now, we don't have an answer to that question. The individual doctor offices don't have vaccines yet. They're going to start putting them in the Walgreens, the CVS, and that sort of thing. But right now, again, it's a inequality in terms of trying to get the vaccine just because you have to do it online or you have to make a phone call. And so those are things that we have to demand be changed. And so we are working on it. But right now, we don't have a solution. And I feel terrible saying that, but we don't. Reverend Dr. Bennett, your turn again.
Thank you so much. I'll make this very quick. I'm thinking about this conversation about how can we get this vaccine in the community in the sense of getting our people more ready to take it. My question is for the doctors. How prepared are you to have theological conversations about what it is you're doing? And when I say theological conversations, have you thought about finding ways to talk about what you're doing and to talk about it in such a way that members of our churches won't feel alienated if we actually bring the science into the church? So I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just wondering, have you all thought about that? In fact, for example, take Dr. Purnell. I'm just loving her presentation, loving everybody's presentation. What do you do if you're no longer hugging, but you're in Pentecostal churches and we've been taught to lay hands on people?
I know. Yeah. My grandfather was apostolic. We're laying on hands through the plexiglass.
So that's what I'm saying. It's stuff like that. Are you prepared? Because I think if we can have those kinds of conversations with pastors, that might open the door or remove some of the resistance to what it is doing. So I'm just raising that question. Have you thought about that or moving in that direction or what?
And that's the essence of this tonight, to start the conversation. And you were present. I think Bishop Guthrie was present a few months ago when we had conversation. I mean, we went in depth. Those kinds of questions. People baptize each other differently. There's different things in the church, and so those are things that we're going to have to answer on an individual basis. But the whole point of tonight is really trying to set the stage so that we can have those conversations. And again, that's about relationship building. When we build that relationship, because the two most trusted entities in the Black community are doctors and religious people.
Well, I will say this, Frank. I will say this. If whenever you all want to have the conversation in Atlanta, ITC is open. Just let me know. We can make that happen, and we can bring you. We can make that and make it a community thing. Whenever the social distance and stuff is lifted, I don't know the answer to that. You all might be better than I would.
That's great. And you and I have talked about that before. So we definitely just need to go ahead and get that done.
One thing I'll say real briefly is, I was thinking about the centurion's daughter. Jesus spoke and she was healed. He didn't lay hands on her. And it reminded me of the fact that we focus so much on preaching on Sunday. We need to focus in on discipleship. These people in our congregations need to be taught. It's not just preaching on Sunday, it's also teaching. And I think, this goes down to relationship building. And, Dr. Bennett being a fellow Kojic, if I can say that, I understand the laying on of hands, but, there are so many aspects of the gospel that I think are missing because we focus so much on teaching. We've got to build up our community and make disciples.
Right. And the anointing, and if I could say this, the anointing still works.
There you go.
The anointing is still all powerful. Yahweh Elohim is still all powerful. Ruach HaKodesh is still in the blessing business. Just because the coronavirus pandemic has appeared, a plague has appeared, doesn't mean that the dunamis power of Elohim is diminished. And so I think in our faith-based communities, we have to be able to model and exemplify that. Some of us have churches or parishes or houses of worship that are in different countries or in different parts of the world. Some people I've never physically seen, I've never laid hands on, but I've prayed with over a phone, I've prayed with over WhatsApp, I've prayed with over a Zoom. And the
Dr.
anointing
Bennett, I see you
still there.
As usual, Dr. Bennett, you've gone and started something. We really getting ready to have church.
Man, I'm just warming up, man.
You just get started. and every time you ask a question, you say, I have a brief question. You have never, ever had a brief question. Ever. Let's hear from Dr. Epps again. I skipped her on the last round. Dr. Epps, you have another question.
Yes, I do. And, just piggybacking off of that, I was trying to find my chat button, but I think it's time for us to really have discussions. And I would love to be there when y'all do that discussion, but to break traditions. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to talk about. But as it relates to the vaccine, it was mentioned about community spread. Where can we tell our faith leaders to go to find out what is the community spread in their area?
The best way is to go to the boards of health.
Yeah.
They actually have very good statistics on that. I mean, down to the zip code.
Yes.
It can tell you the amount of spread, the positivity, and that's probably the best source. And then, as you know, Dr. Epps, here at Emory, and so if you're fortunate to be at a big academic or near academic center, most of them are doing a really good job with statistics and detailing exactly what's going on. But I would say your county boards of health are probably the best source. Let's see. We still don't have Reverend Hightower. I have not found him. I have to use a point of personal privilege and ask my blood brother, Vernon Keith Jones, who is also a minister. He is on. Brother Jones, do you have a question for us?
I'm here, good sir. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I appreciate that. I wanted to ask the question, but may I just chime in very briefly with what Dr. Bennett was referring to and Dr. Permel in terms
briefly.
of briefly. We as a ministerial community have to reimagine new modalities for ministry in terms of what that means from minister to parishioner, and be able to create the environment for realizing that God moves in not only mysterious ways, but in different and reimagined ways. And so I echo what Dr. Bennett is saying in terms of us being able to come to the table and talk about this thing beyond faith, being able to accept new models and modality for medicine and the conjunction of ministry as well.
And I have to give Reverend Jones credit. He was the one that came up with the title for this talk. I spent days trying to think of it, and I asked him, and he told me within about 5 seconds, we should talk about beyond faith. And I was like, oh, wow, that's it.
Hey,
so
Frank,
thank you,
to his point,
Reverend Brother Jones, for your contribution.
Amen. Thank you.
Hey, Frank, to his point, I do think that the coronavirus has changed our reality forever. And I think, there are some traditions that are going to have to adapt and evolve. That sometimes eras end. And some of the eras, people, and I say era, E-R-A, I do think there's a shifting going on. I think God has woke up our planet. I think he's woke up this country. And I do think that we have to accept, as Elder Brother Jones just indicated, that we need to implement some new modalities.
Okay. We have lots of questions on the chat. I have to be transparent and I certainly understand this, but we have one person that's watching that says that they don't appreciate the fact that we are having to rush because of questions, but I'd rather spend a little more time trying to get to as many questions as possible. And I certainly understand, and that's why this is just the beginning. We can have as many of these conversations as we want to. And our speakers are always willing to speak, and we have other speakers that can speak. So we're always willing to go into detail. If you want to reach out to us individually, we're glad to do that. But we're trying to really kind of get a survey of what people are wondering and answer certain questions. And that's why we kind of started off with the most important questions that we really needed to know and get to. And now we're just trying to find out what our faith-based community wants to know. But I certainly understand, and I hate the fact that you feel like we're rushing through it. But I think it's good to try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. There was another question about the vaccines. Dr. Collier kind of addressed that earlier. Which vaccine should you take? The answer is whichever one you can get. Dr. Collier, there's a question. There's a person here. She didn't necessarily ask a question, but she is a veteran teacher of 45 years. And a lot of people are wondering, should teachers be a priority? Should they be at the top of the list?
Absolutely. I have no idea why they are not at this point. They've gone through first responders. I mean, they're putting, people that work in grocery stores ahead of teachers. And teachers are, one, in a controlled environment. Their, classrooms are overcrowded. Most of them, particularly those that are more senior, have health conditions that put them at higher risk. To open the schools up safely, it would make common sense. Sometimes common sense prevails. This is not science. This is common sense. That you would protect those individuals that are in charge. On the first day of class, when they reopened the schools in DeKalb County a couple of weeks ago, they had 120 teachers call out sick. Now, impossible to replace. They don't have that many substitutes in the system. But imagine that you start off with your workforce, you're 120 teachers short on day one. So, a common sense phenomenon to get this going would be to prioritize teachers as, early receivers of the vaccine, regardless of what their age is and what their comorbid conditions is, because they're in a high risk environment. Nobody's putting, air, something in this classroom to circulate air better. Most classrooms have windows that are sealed. You can't open them. So it's an environment that they without question, are high risk. And so being the primary caregiver for many teachers, many of them should move to the front of the line as far as vaccines are concerned.
Well, it's 8 o'clock, and we're actually over the amount of time that we had allotted to this. So I want to thank everybody for being patient and participating. And again, this just shows us we need to do this again. But we're going to go ahead and close out. And before we do, I want to have each of our panelists just make a brief, please keep it to
45 seconds.
1 minute, which equates to 5 minutes in physician speak. 1 minute. But then I also want to hear, we're going to let our faith-based community close us out with Brother Bennett and Brother Guthrie making some brief comments as well. So, Dr. Collier, why don't you go first?
One, just let me say what a pleasure it has been to serve on this panel. All the physician providers, I have thoroughly enjoyed each of the comments of every individual. There are some things we weren't exactly in congruence with, but the bottom line is that we got some good information out to the people that are participating. So thank you so much for allowing me the privilege of doing so. Finally, if the vaccine is available in your community, no matter which one it is, get the vaccine. Don't worry about whether you're going to get the second dose, get the first dose, and we'll find the second dose when it's time to get it.
And Dr. Collier, can you just tell people again where you can be heard on a weekly basis?
Okay, I'm the radio consultant for Urban One Radio, formerly Radio One, the Ricky Smiley Morning Show syndicated. It's the largest syndicated radio show across the country, and I'm on every day. And my first segment is at 6:45 in the morning. So tune in when you're getting up, getting out, about to do those things that you do. Tune in. Just go on the internet on your cell phone. Just ask for Ricky Smiley Morning Show, and you can hear the segments because we literally bring out new information on a daily basis on this topic.
And what's your nickname?
Atlanta's own Hip Hop Doc.
Dr. Purnell.
I'm just going to say 3 quick things. When given the opportunity to get vaccinated, get vaccinated. If you have fear, concerns, or skepticism, speak with your primary care physician. Listen to other doctors, especially Black and Brown doctors who have been present in the public to talk about the importance of getting vaccinated. Fight for health equity to be a priority in this nation, because you can't achieve herd immunity through vaccination without going through health equity, meaning we all have to be vaccinated in order to have herd immunity. And 3, be in the position to be as healthy as you possibly can. And putting yourself in the position to be as healthy as you possibly can, meaning lifestyle choices don't have to be exclusive of the choice or decision to get vaccinated. You can do it all. Eat healthier, be physically active, and practice public health guidelines. Wear your mask properly, wash your hands frequently, practice safe distancing, which is at least 6 feet of people who do not live in your household, and avoid cramped, crowded indoor spaces. And above all, and through it all, the Heavenly Father still reigns, and Yahushua HaMashiach is definitely on the throne.
Thank you so much. What do you have coming up in the next few weeks, Dr. Purnell?
Multiple things. So you can look for me on social media. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Chris MD. I'm on Instagram at The Good Dr. MD. I have a Facebook page called Life Clinic 101. So doing various speaking engagements. I'll be speaking with the National Library of Medicine, speaking throughout New York and New Jersey, speaking across media. So I'm the people's physician.
All right. And we'll come to you next, Dr. Emmons, but I did see Reverend Perche. You had your hand up earlier. Did you have a question, Reverend Perche, before we? I'm going to give you an opportunity at the end as well if you want to make some final comments, but if you had a question.
Oh, actually, no, I didn't have a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna allow you to make some comments at the end too. Okay, Reverend Darrell Amos, one of my lifelong friends. Well, it's dangerous to give you the microphone, but let's hear it.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say is to everyone out there, I encourage them to hold on. We're a strong people. We survived slavery. We survived years of discrimination and abuse. We're a strong and a mighty people. And so we have to hold on, and we survived by our faith. We held on to God. And so we have to keep holding on to his unchanging hand. But that being said, I think a real important thing I would say is I think as Dr. Collier said, we need to support our teachers. Our children have really suffered a lot of mental health trauma from all of the disruption. Even my kids, they're virtual and then somebody gets exposed and then they're home for 14 days. It's been a very tough year. I have a senior who's applying to college, and this has been a most challenging year for him and his younger sister. And I do believe the teachers need to be vaccinated because they're exposed not just to kids who a lot of times don't show symptoms. They can be super spreaders. And then these teachers take it home to their families and their elderly parents. So I'm an advocate for the teachers. I also want to say, read and learn how to boost your immune health. I think it's important that we educate ourselves. We have to eat right. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to eat properly if we're going to beat this. And lastly, I think that with all the vaccines that are going out and all the finances and energy that's being put in getting people vaccinated is regarding being able to meet again. I think that in the summer, I think as it warms up, we're going to probably see if people get the vaccination, some loosening of some of the standards and some, we're going to be able to socialize a little more. And I would just encourage everybody to hold on, get your vaccine, do your social distancing. And I believe the spring and the summer are probably going to be an opportunity for us to experience some normality.
Okay. I have to address one other question that I see that came up in the chat, and it says basically they were saying that this is only for pastors, that this was directed to the wrong audience, only for pastors, and I would have to disagree with you in the most gentle way. This was initiated by the faith-based community. They specifically came to us and asked us to do this. But we have had several of, I think this is our 9th episode of Ask a Black Doctor, where we have talked about pediatrics, how it affects children, how it affects people going back to school. We've talked about your mental health. We've talked about your financial health. We've talked about I can't even remember all the things. We talked about the elderly population. We actually have a video that talks about the elderly population. So and again, this was initiated by the faith-based community, but in our advertising, we asked for everybody to be involved, and we send this out to thousands of people. And if you go to our site, www.atlmed.org, we have a whole content page full of COVID education. That's one thing that we are very intentional about, hitting every segment of the community. So I would have to disagree with your comment, but all comments are welcome. But I just want to let you know that we have lots of other information, and you can reach out to me personally if you want to help us create a different webinar. We can do that as well. So I just want to address that so that people don't think that this was only for one particular organization. Next, we're going to hear from our faith-based community, and let's hear first from Reverend Prashak.
Dr. Jones, I just want to thank you and this panel again for opening this up to the community. I felt like we covered some really pressing questions that our congregations and our communities have about the vaccine, about opening up as a faith-based, continuing to do our worship, and those kind of things. So thank you for bringing this to our community. I look forward to continuing this dialogue, especially as we try to strive towards new pathways forward in our new normal. How do we get back to worship? How do we do our funerals? How do we continue fellowship during COVID? I mean, it's been a year now, and we certainly have been adapting. But there certainly has to be more adaptations in terms of us connecting with one another and staying safe. So I look forward to continuing this dialogue. Thank you to all the panelists. It's been just a night of brilliance. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Dr. Epps, but I wanted to mention one more comment that I didn't say that I wanted to be clear. The one of the main impetuses for this particular episode was because we have a lot of people that are Christians and other faith and religion and everything. They were using religion as a reason to not get the vaccine. And so that is the specific question that we were trying to address today, that you can be a Christian and spiritual, or I keep saying Christian, but I mean all faith. You can be spiritual and religious and practice your religiosity. I always want to say that word. I don't even know if it's a word. Your religiosity. But at the same time, there is a role for science. And I strongly believe, just as all of our speakers have said, is that through religion, through your spirituality, medicine was born, and they coexist well. And that's the whole essence of this presentation. And so we want to specifically address, and if you're on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, whatever social media you're on, you will hear people specifically say, I'm just going to let God take care of me. I don't need to get the vaccine. I don't need to wear a mask. I'm just going to let God take care of me. And so that was the specific reason for this episode. But we have many more episodes that you can address. Okay, I'm done. I just had to get that done. Now let's hear from Dr. Epps.
I don't have too much more to say. I just think this has been great. I ask that we continue the conversations for those that have called in and listen tuned in. I think, for those that are not on, we need to bring those conversations into our church, these conversations into our church and into our homes. I think all the panelists, this has been really great. I text Dr. Jones, this is one of the best webinars I've been to, because we had candid conversations, and I thank you all for just keeping it real, because that's what we needed to hear. We need to hear the truth, hear just what it is, and we needed to hear from people that look like us. And so I really appreciate that, and thank you, Dr. Jones, for putting this on for us.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for all that you do in the community. Next, we hear from Dr. Bennett.
Thank you again for this phenomenal conversation. Absolutely, just great. And I'm looking forward to this type of thing continuing. And if I could make one recommendation or suggestion, I would love for us to find a way to have this panel to be interfaith. And when I say interfaith, can we get some of our Islamic brothers and sisters in this conversation? Because the Black community has common issues, and regardless of our religiosity, you know, these same issues show their faces everywhere. So I would love for us to continue this, and I would love for us, if it's possible, to bring some of our Islamic brothers and sisters on board so we can have a really phenomenal conversation. Thank you all for everything.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent suggestion. And we're going to end out with you, Bishop Guthrie, because you were one of the main ones that came to us and asked for this. And we are glad to be able to answer questions for your church and your denomination, and for all of our faith-based community, and for everybody in the community. But we want to thank you for stepping up and pushing us to do this. So we'll save the best for last.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And I want to thank the panel for such a thorough information that we can take back to our congregation. I would just like to end it with two scriptures. One states that the sons of Issachar were wise because they had an understanding of the times. And the second one is out of the book of Daniel 1 and 4, as it talks about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how that they had an understanding of science. So science has always played a very important part in biblical application. So we want to take this back to our congregation. I'm over 54 churches, and I want to make sure that our pastors and our congregants will be able to have an understanding of what's going on. So thank you very much. And I also want to thank Dr. Priscilla Hubbard for all the work that she is doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Hubbard is the backbone of our organization. Again, I want to thank all of our participants. You did a phenomenal job as usual. As you can see, we have to do this again. So we will be calling on you again. We want to thank all of our participants, all of our questions, and we will be back again. So again, thank you for joining us. And that ends this segment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.